We can edit that out. We can edit that out. Hey. We can edit that out.
Are we? Oh, we are.
Yeah.
Oh, well, welcome back to the We Can Edit That Out podcast. No, fuck. I fucked it up.
That's all right.
Here, you do it.
Okay. Welcome back to We Can Edit That Out podcast, your friendly neighborhood podcast. This is Jack.
This is Rob.
And this is the episode about punk, where we talk about all things punk, and everything is very punk in what we're going to talk about. Yeah. Maybe we'll just get drunk and just talk shit. That could be pretty punk too. Here's one thing I was thinking about is that if we're going to do this whole episode about punk, I think just saying the word punk over and over and over again is kind of lame, you know? It loses its meaning when you say it so much. Kind of like when you get really stoned and you say smorgasbord over again. You know, you go, smorgasbord. What does that even mean anymore? I don't even know what that word is. You know what I mean? So I had the idea that instead of saying the word punk, we could replace it with another word, like country and western. As in, how did you get into country and western? Well, I heard the Sex Pistols.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about that.
Okay. Let's just do a podcast then. I'll stop coming up with stupid ideas. But I did have one idea. I wanted to know basically how you got into punk. You know, what's your first memory of I don't know, the culture of it.
Just giving you time to gulp your beer into the fucking microphone that I've asked you like a million times not to do.
I wasn't gulping into them. Was I? I turned to the side.
You don't realize how loud you gulp beer, but I'm telling you
I'm a loud gulper. Here's the thing is you don't drink beer on the podcast. You drink wine. So I think I drink wine quietly, but maybe you drink beer as loudly as I do.
Well, when you drink beer, you try to get as much beer down your throat as fast as humanly possible.
That's punk.
So what happens, you go...
All right. Okay. I will turn further away from the mic from now on.
Cool.
Okay, so I usually just turn to the side, but I'll turn backwards. How about that?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, let's try it real quick. Do you hear this? Is that better?
No, it's still loud as fuck.
It's still loud. Can you still hear it over the phone?
Why don't you just sip like a normal human being?
I don't know how to do that.
Just take a fucking casual sip of beer and not like...
Let's try it. I think even that was still loud.
It was better.
I think maybe I need to put my beer in a glass when we do the podcast, you know?
That's an idea.
I don't know. Should we pause while I get a glass?
Yeah, sure.
Is this engaging enough?
No, it's great.
the podcast so far?
Yeah. No.
So far we've talked about punk. Not at all.
I hit pause. It's all good.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. When I started to gulp my beer, you hit pause?
Yeah, totally.
Okay. I thought that might be funny to leave that in there. Like we just ramble for an hour about everything but punk, you know?
It's kind of awesome that he thinks that I hit pause. Because I really didn't. Oh, he's back.
You didn't hit pause. I heard you talk to the microphone.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't think you actually hit pause.
I totally did. And then I hit record right as soon as you walked back in the room. So
Cool. Here, but you're going to hear me pouring it into the cup. Because that's loud.
By the way, that's not a cup. That's a fucking measuring cup.
Well, what did you just say is your second word in that definition?
I thought you were going to grab a glass and drink beer out of a glass like a normal adult.
No, it's a measuring cup. It's fine. This way I know how much I'm drinking.
Yeah, all right, I'll give you that.
I don't know. It's weird. I've always drinking out of measuring cups. Because it's like always the biggest cup in the house is the measuring cup. And I like to have big amounts of alcohol or water. I drink a lot of water as well. Here's good advice to kids out there. Drink your water. It's important.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Otherwise, you look like me when you get old. Nobody wants that.
For those of you who can't see what's happening, Jack poured himself an entire half measuring cup full of beer. Now he's opening another one just so he can double fill his measuring cup and be drinking a
Well, I don't want to have to do this over and over again and have you stop talking while I'm filling up the cup. And then now I'm hitting everything too. Maybe you're hearing all these smacks against the microphone on all that. Hey,
this is the weird. I feel like I'm in a zoo. This is like the
what do you
weirdest
mean you're
thing
in
in
a
the world.
zoo?
I mean, I'm not personally in a zoo. Like I'm a guest at a zoo watching animals.
Dude, how long we
feed.
have known each other, and you've seen me drink out of measuring cups. I'm sure, like thousands of times.
It's true.
I always do. I don't know why you're surprised about it.
I guess I'm not surprised.
I think I've never poured a beer into a measuring cup. I think I usually drink my water out of measuring cups. So actually watching somebody pour a beer into a measuring cup is probably throws you off a little bit.
It's not that different from being at a concert or a game where they give you,
That's what I'm talking about.
everything in a plastic cup.
So,
But hey, it's quieter. For some reason, when you sip out of it, it's quieter.
I know. Too much air comes out of a bottle.
Too much hot air comes out of my
air comes out
podcast
of my
cohort.
All right. We need some stories.
You were asking me a question.
I did. Do you remember the question?
Yeah.
Okay, then answer.
How about you re-ask the question so I don't have to edit all this fucking shit out?
Okay. Are we going to edit all that stuff? Okay, so we're actually starting the podcast now. So I would like to know, what is your first memory of the culture of punk? Like, did you hear the music first? Did you see punks walking down the street? Did you read about it in a book? I don't know. There's so many different ways people first have any sort of idea of what this culture is,
Yeah. Well, honestly, the first time I can remember seeing what I would recognize as punks was when I saw Blade Runner when I was a kid.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's two movies that I think kind of stick out where punks really make a bit of an impact. In Blade Runner, they're just extras in one of the Chinatown scenes, but they look super cool. And I remember first seeing them on the screen, oh my God, these people look fucking awesome.
You still notice that and you're like, what is that? And then that's the interesting thing, is because you notice them and you're like, that's fucking cool. And then you see people walking down the street looking like that, and you're like, wait a minute, this is actually a thing. That's not just an extra in a movie. This is we didn't know it at the time, but in your mind, you kind of already know that this is an actual subculture. I need to know more about this.
Yeah. The next time I can maybe remember is I think it's Star Trek 4, the movie where they go save the whales or something like that.
I don't remember that.
And there's a scene where they're on a city bus. They come back to Earth and they're on a city bus, and there's some dudes with mohawks that are harassing people on the bus, and
they're playing music too loud or something.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. I do remember that. Maybe doesn't Spock do a Spock thing where their music shuts off or something?
Yeah. He does some Spock stuff to him, and
okay.
But this was sort of I guess in the 80s when you're growing up, there's always sort of a caricature of punk that you see on movies and TV shows. They're always the street gang that corners somebody in the alley. They're always menacing. They're there to cause trouble. They're there to vandalize. They're there to beat people up. They're always like a street gang kind of.
Oh, now I'm remembering my first experience of the punk culture. It was a Chips episode.
Yeah. I remember hearing about this one.
If people don't know what Chips is, it was a TV show back in the late 70s. And Chips stood for California Highway Patrol. And Eric Estrada was in it. I don't know who his partner was. I can't remember. But Eric Estrada was already kind of famous. And then he was in that show. And then he did other stuff after that. So it was about this punk band. and they were causing trouble. They were the like menacing force in the neighborhood that Ponch and John were patrolling, and they ended up busting them for some petty crimes or some shit and putting them away. And then instead of the punk band playing this concert, Eric Estrada gets up and sings with his band in this concert, and it is the lamest fucking pop song you could, late 70s Bee Gees style, although the Bee Gees, I don't know, I don't mind them in this day and age, but anyway, you know what I mean, this sugar pop shit. So you watch that as a kid and you're like, well, those guys were actually kind of fun, and okay, this is what we're not supposed to be like as kids, but man, they had better music. Because the guy who saves the day and sings the song, wow, what a shit fucking song. So why would I root for that? Maybe I'm more into the punk side of life. You know what I mean? Oh.
Interesting.
Did you ever see that episode?
I don't think so.
I can't remember what the band... Oh.
Wait, was the band called Pain? Or was that another movie I'm thinking of?
I can't remember. Maybe when we take a smoke break, we'll Google it and get back to the audience. I'm sure there's some fucker out there listening to this who's older than I am going like, oh my God, you don't know that? It's the blah, 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 the blah, 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 you know? Yeah. Like, okay, well, you know, I forget stuff easily, and I usually really do forget stuff I could care less about anyway, so, you know.
Well, one question I have for you, if you didn't forget,
is
when do you remember, what is the first time you heard punk music, not just seeing punks on TV or punks in movies or whatever?
Yeah.
What's your first recollection of like the first time you heard the music, and can you remember who the band was and where you were at?
Well, for me, I mean, it really all comes back to the Sex Pistols because that was my generation, you know? I was young, so Black Flag and the Circle Jerks and that whole movement of like hardcore was going on, but that was still underground for a 10-year-old to know about. So what was still slightly accessible to us was the Pistols and the Clash. And I remember must have been like 77, 78 when my mom had taken the kids to downtown Seattle, and we were getting out of the car, and I saw this graffiti across the wall that said Sex Pistols. And I said, Mom, whoa, what's Sex Pistols? She goes, oh, it's a punk band. And I was like, what the fuck is a punk band? You know, but my curiosity was intrigued just because I thought that's a cool name. You know, even at 5 years old, I really didn't know what sex was, but I knew it was something taboo for a 5-year-old to know about, you know? And then the Pistols part was like, oh, there's kind of like a violent taboo sort of thing. Oh, it was curious, you know? And then, you know, spent the rest of my formative years listening to heavy metal because I was also part of that generation. And then I had an older brother, and my older brother's friend was a girl. She gave me a ride back to my place from school one time. She was 16. I must have been 14. And we started talking about music. And she was like, you ever listen to the Sex Pistols? I'm like, yeah, I've heard of them. It was like Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious or something like that. And I don't know who plays guitar or who plays bass. And she goes, oh, they both play guitar and bass. And I'm like, nobody knew anything back then. But she had a tape in her car, and she was like, here, take this tape and listen to it. I was like, okay, cool. And I took it home and listened to it. And I was like, wow, this is fucking amazing. This is what it is. And then later that same year, I was watching USA Night Flight, and they had the punk rock movie on, and the Sex Pistols were on that. And seeing them live on the TV after having listened to them on the tape, and then seeing their graffiti, you know, downtown Seattle, it all kind of coalesced into one thing. It was like, oh, this is punk. I really fucking like this, you know, and after having listened to metal for so long in my early teenage years, it's like, well, they're singing about stuff that I can relate to on a daily basis, not this fantasy made up Satan and dragons and shit like that. And so it really struck me as they're singing about reality, about a reality that I can relate to. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came to be. And a lot of people say, oh, Sex Pistols are not punk. Sex Pistols are the kings of punk. Oh, they didn't even invent it. They did. I could care less about that. This was my beginning, and that's the important thing. It doesn't matter if it was punk or not, or what you think about it now, because that was your beginning, So that was a really long-winded answer, and I'm sorry. I would like to hear yours.
Similarly, I think Sex Pistols was probably the very first iteration of that for me. Before I got into that stuff when I was younger, I was really listening to a lot of like metal and hair metal. I liked, Metallica and Motley Crue and Poison and Slayer, pretty much anything that was like remotely associated with metal or like heavy metal. Motley Crue did a cover of Anarchy in the UK, but changed the lyrics to Anarchy in the USA. So that was like technically the first. And then I bought a Sex Pistols cassette, didn't even register it as punk. I just thought they were another like metal band. Later on, I got introduced to Fugazi, I think when I was like in 8th grade. And following year, someone made the connection that Ian MacKaye had a band before Fugazi. And I remember going into Wax Trax Records in Boulder, my hometown. And Wax Trax was an amazing record store that had another location in Denver. And it was loosely connected with the industrial record label based out of Chicago that helped put out like Ministry and a lot of really groundbreaking industrial stuff.
And that was also called Wax Trax?
Well, they started the record store in Denver. And then they moved to Chicago, but they kept the record store.
And I think they opened one up in Boulder.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in this record store in Boulder, I go in and I go to the used CD rack and I see Minor Threat complete discography. And so I pulled it off the shelf and they had a little listening station with headphones. And I put the CD in and I remember the CD is roughly about 28 minutes long. And I listened to the entire thing. Just sitting there with my jaw open.
Right. You're like, I just don't want this to stop.
Yeah. And of course, I bought it for $4 or whatever. And that was the beginning. And it was like everything that I was looking for in aggressive, heavy, hard music was all encompassed in one moment. And then it was like a light went off and I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for this whole time. All this time I've been listening to these like terrible, like teased hair bands.
Right.
It was really punk that I was looking for.
Right. Yeah. And like I was saying, they were singing about stuff that was related more. We could relate to more as teenagers, Listening to metal kind of comes from like growing up, being really interested in horror movies, kind of, and it's an easy like transition to be like, oh, I like horror movies. I like Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, because they're kind of singing along that thing. And then when you hear TV Party by Black Flag, you're like, oh, but actually this is like my day-to-day life, not a fantasy that I don't have any connection to, you know what I mean? But that begs the question. Now I'm interested. What did you look like as a young punk kid? Did you look cool, or were you just like a ragamuffin thrown together? Like, I don't know. Maybe this is working, but maybe it's not.
It was pretty cobbled together. Like, another big gateway outside of music was skateboarding, and there was a big resurgence of skateboarding in the early 90s. And as I started getting more into punk, I think my fashion started altering too. But I didn't know, like, how to buy bondage pants or where to find like cool punk clothes. So
they didn't sell them in the store in Boulder, that's for sure.
yeah, so
They didn't sell them in the store in Seattle in the fucking 80s and 90s either.
yeah,
You know?
so I just go to thrift stores. I'd buy like weird shirts, weird button-up shirts, weird pants, and then I would like, I didn't know how to make pants tight, so I would take like polyester pants or whatever and use safety pins to sort of like bring them closer.
Wow. Okay.
And sort of wrap them around. And it was kind of dangerous because I'd be walking around with safety pins all the way through my pants all the time, and one would open up and I'd be constantly like sticking myself.
Yeah.
I would make bracelets from like scrap leather, and I would go to like the old lady crafting store in Boulder called Michael's. I'd buy like whatever, metal studs or things people would bedazzle jackets with, and I would just sort of cobble together stuff. I'd use Sharpies and old t-shirts, and I would hand draw patches, and then I'd sew them on shirts.
Nice.
And it was just sort of like it was completely cobbled together. And
That's pretty fucking DIY, though, to tell you the truth.
it was super DIY. And actually, I found one of my old punk shirts the last time I was in Colorado and at my parents' house. I was like, fuck, that actually looks kind of cool. Like it's stupid, but I mean,
You wouldn't wear it now, though, right?
I don't know. I mean,
Maybe you
not
would, maybe
not
you wouldn't.
really.
Nah, no.
I'm too
no.
old.
Yeah.
How about you? What
me?
what was your style like before you got into punk?
Stylistically, so yeah, like I said, I was really into metal before I was into punk, so I already had that thrash metal kind of look of like long hair and flannel shirts and blue jeans. I mean, the tightest blue jeans you could get, but they were always faded out like fuck and ripped up, and then I think a lot of Seattle at that point kind of had that sort of jump was from thrash metal to crossover to punk. So a lot of it looked like I did. I mean, if anybody's seen the pictures of the Accused, they all had long as fuck hair, but man, they were fucking super fun, fucking live punk as fuck band. I mean, you could call them whatever genre you want, splatter rock or crossover or whatever the fuck, I don't care, but I'll just put them in that all-inclusive punk rock, and yeah, that's what we looked like. It was like hardcore with hair. I remember Tommy from the Accused had a sticker on his guitar that said hardcore with hair, and I was like, yeah, okay, so it's fine if we all have long hair. We're still fucking hardcore punks, And it's funny because that whole look, what was it, like 10 years later, is exactly what grunge looked like,
Yeah.
So we were almost like the blueprint for grunge. I mean, I'm sure like Kurt Cobain and people like that kind of were a little bit into that scene as well, and kept that going. It was, I don't know, Seattle was just weird. We just had, we were kind of cut off from the rest of the world. So it was like long hair and flannel shirts and fucking, ripped up jeans and Chuck Taylor Converse,
Yeah.
I mean, nobody I knew who could afford combat boots at that point, but Chuck Taylors were like $15-$20. So, and the Ramones wore them. So you're like, yeah, this is cool. Chuck Taylors are fucking punk rock shoe now, it's so corporate, it would be a weird thing to wear them, but yeah, I didn't cut that hair off until I was maybe like 20, to tell you the truth. But I was going to all these fucking crazy punk gigs, and that was, I mean, I turned 20 in 1992. Yeah. So all the 80s, very early 90s, and Poison Idea would come up and play Seattle, and it'd just be a bunch of long hair motherfuckers. And even Poison Idea at that time, look at Feel the Darkness, fucking, you got Slayer Hippie and fucking Mondo. They both had long hair back then, so it's just like it was a very Northwest thing, I think, just to not look like that stereotypical punk, just to like have this sort of like influences from thrash metal and skate rock and fucking all that, you know, and it wasn't punk for us to spend any money on punk clothes. Like, you don't buy those. You just fucking like buy the cheap shit at thrift shop. And that's fucking, it wasn't, we were intending to look punk or not punk or anything. It's like, that's just what you could afford. So you wore that, you know what I mean?
It's funny that like flannel became such a worldwide fashion trend, particularly after the explosion of grunge, because in the Northwest, you know, it's cold and rainy a lot, and long sleeve flannel shirts are a very commonplace thing because they're inexpensive and
keep you warm.
So like, it's funny that sort of functionality fashion became like the ultimate fashion statement in the like early 90s, you know.
It was weird, but it all just grew out of that, you know. And I think it started out with the whole, you know, I mean, Seattle was originally a lumberjack town, and that fashion kind of like was just like the lumberjacks came, and the flannels never left. We just kind of, it was just a standard, typical thing. You're in Seattle, you put on your flannel, you know, and then you know, the grunge scene made a whole fashion movement out of it, but we were all kind of confused about that. Like, how is that a fashion? We don't really wear them by choice. We just wear them because it's there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think the media made a fashion statement out of it. I think the bands were just dressing like that anyways, you know?
Right. And like I said, we just dressed like that because it was there. It wasn't, you know, you didn't go to a fucking boutique. We didn't have Hot Topics or fucking any punk store. You just went to a store. You went to the store that said clothes and you bought the thing that said shirt. And it just happened to be a flannel shirt, you know? That was kind of a thing.
One clothes, please.
Like Eddie Bauer or REI was where you would get your clothes at, you know? I mean, Seattle in the 80s was just, it was just weird like that, you know? I mean, of course you had like high fashion people in Seattle and all that, but they were spending a lot of money on their clothes. But for the kids who didn't have a lot of money, you know, this is what we look like, you know, just fucking, I don't know, kick around kids. Kind of fun to think about it, reminisce on it. I think this whole episode is a lot of reminiscing. But you know what I always say? They just don't make nostalgia like they used to. So anyway, talk about like we were talking about earlier about like discovering punk bands. So for me, you were talking about skate videos, but I remember I never really skateboarded so much. I just wasn't coordinated enough. But I remember like a lot of friends of mine that all listened to the same kind of like thrash and crossover and fucking hardcore punk. They all had remember that zine Thrasher?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
of course.
So we'd all be flipping through Thrasher, looking at fucking like the cool skateboarders decks, and like, oh, what fucking fucking stickers do they have on it? Septic Death, cool. We need to know about Septic Death. Corrosion of Conformity. Okay, we need to know about Corrosion of Conformity. You know, who started out as a hardcore punk band, by the way. DRI, we have to know about DRI, you know, and all that stuff. And so we'd learn from that. And fuck, it was such a weird time. It was like a I don't know, like a Rubik's Cube, you know? You'd turn one thing and it'd open up another thing to turn another thing to open up, and then like putting the puzzle into place. You know, every time you made one move, other things would open up. Like, okay, well, I need to know about DRI. And then you buy the fucking first DRI album, and then you look at the thanks list, and they thank a bunch of bands. For example, I can't remember exactly if DRI did that or if it was other bands, but this was definitely the case, you know. But you'd see all the thanks and go, okay, cool. Now I need to know about these bands also. You know, and you'd go to the record store, and man, we would spend entire days in record stores just thumbing through every single record in the used bin. Because they didn't really separate them back then. It was just like, almost like, here's clothes, here's music. You know, like used records, all of them, A to Z, thousands and thousands. But you would spend an entire day going through every single one, like, ooh, I've heard of that. I've heard of this. Somebody mentioned that somewhere. I can't even remember where they mentioned it. Okay, I'm going to buy it, you know? And you know, there's the jacket buy is that you'd be going through the used records and you'd see one that you're like, oh, okay, that looks intriguing. You know, the cover does. I'm going to buy that, you know? And, I don't know if you ever had this experience where you would hear about the band and then you would find the used album in the bin, but it would be one of their later records. And you would take it home and put it on and get so excited to hear Rudimentary Peni. You've heard about it forever, and it was impossible to find the records. But I found the tape of Cacophony at Fallout, the skateboard shop in Seattle that doesn't exist anymore. And I found a tape copy of it. I went home and played it, and I'm like, okay, this is Rudimentary Peni. And then it's like, what the fuck is this? I mean, now I love that album because, you know, it was the first exposure I had of them. So it is nostalgic in a way. But at the time, it was like, is this punk? All right, I'm going to listen to it again and again and again to try and figure out why everybody was so obsessed with this band. So that's why I'm nostalgic about that album, is I listened to it so many times. But then somehow you get a copy of the EPs or Death Church and you're like, mind is blown. You're like, oh, now I get it. Okay, all the pieces of the puzzle fit together now. You know what I mean? So I think these subcultures that aren't easily accessible, like punk, are kind of a puzzle that you can put together as a kid. And it's almost what makes it really interesting, you know?
It's a great analogy.
The music gives you this, like when you heard the good albums by these bands, it does give you that charge, you know, like nothing you ever felt before. Probably like the first time your parents heard the Elvis or some shit, you know, where it's like, oh, this is mine and it's powerful and I feel this intensity and this fucking adrenaline and this tingle and all of that shit, you know. I mean, I don't think there's a drug I've ever taken that's as good as the first time I heard the Sex Pistols, tell you the truth. You know what I mean? And so there's that, and there's the discovery aspect, and it's just a very intense thing as a kid. I mean, still, even as an adult, you know? So, yeah. I don't know. I think that's why I still listen to it. You know what I mean? Because I will discover bands now in a completely different way, you know, from fucking internet searches and shit like that. But every once in a while, we'll discover a band and I'm like, oh, fuck, that just is kicking my ass again, you know. Hey, now that I'm like almost 50, a lot of times it's stoner rock, and a lot of times it might be black metal, or it might be newer thrash metal. But shit, man, a lot of times it is still punk, and I still feel like I'm fucking 16 again. You know, it's great. Keeps you young. Harkening back to last episode, what keeps you young? Punk rock does. There you go. And heavy drinking.